In 1914, before the First World War, there was a man whose name was not explained, but we named him David. David went to the Antarctic region to become a weather observer using a steamship with the captain and his crew. After a few days of travel, David and the captain finally arrived at the location where David would work. They got off and set foot on the island and did not forget supplies, because David would be there researching the weather for a year. A remote island with very few natural resources that could be utilized, or maybe none. Every year, someone is assigned to be a weather observer on the island. So of course, before David, there must have been someone else in the cabin. However, there were no signs of life there, only a few items that might still be usable. Besides the cabin, there was a lighthouse that stood long before. When they were going there, David and the captain saw a sign that said, "Gruner, the owner of this small waterfall." Who is Gruner? The captain of the ship tried to call the person in the lighthouse. It seemed like someone lived in it because he didn't come out. David finally broke into the lighthouse. They found a man still asleep and woke him up. The captain asked the man where the person in charge of the island was. The man woke up and didn't say much. It seemed like he didn't know where the person the captain was looking for was. The man was named Gruner. Gruner had been there for a long time. After it was deemed sufficient, the captain and his crew returned to the ship and left David with Gruner on the island. One more year, there will be someone who replaces David there. David is a married man. There is a photo of his wife. That night, David read a book about animals that might be in the sea. Then the next morning, David saw many piles of shells surrounded by rocks that looked very neat. Did someone make them? David started working to record every wind direction and other things. When he pointed the binoculars at the lighthouse, David saw Gruner with someone, but who? Or maybe David just saw wrong. Then that night, David had a horror experience. He heard a strange sound from outside the cabin. Not long after the door was banged on, maybe there were quite a few. David hid on the ground, holding a small stick. When he peeked, David was surprised by the eyes that were looking at him. David reflexively stuck his small stick into the eye. The next morning, David saw many footprints in the sand. What figure terrorized him last night? David tried to call Gruner, but Gruner refused. Gruner seemed not to want anyone to enter his lighthouse. Because of last night's incident, David made a barrier around his cabin, even though he knew that this barrier might not be effective. David opened the box brought by the captain. He found a long rifle to defend himself. Night had come. David was terrorized again by something fierce outside the cabin. David tried to defend himself inside. The figure resembled a human who adapted to water, or maybe a mermaid. David made a fire defense around his cabin, but he was also in danger. David got out of the cabin and hid in the rocks. Last night's incident made the cabin unfit for habitation, even though it was only partially burned. David could not survive there. David tries to follow Gruner to find water. David wants to finish him off, but there is a blue human figure that disturbs David. The blue human turns out to be the same one that attacked David last night, but this one is calmer and more obedient to Gruner. David just wants him to stay at the lighthouse, otherwise he will finish off the blue human. In the end, Gruner invites David to stay at the lighthouse and bring David's food stock. There, David was quite surprised how Gruner could survive with the blue man. Gruner did not want to explain in detail, but the point is Gruner could survive and the blue man obeyed him. David was quite surprised that there were aliens living on Earth other than humans. The blue man was very afraid of Gruner, and David felt that maybe it was a little strange. David asked Gruner why he didn't signal the passing ship to help him. Gruner was happy to live there, and maybe Gruner would not leave this island. Human civilization did not suit him. It was really strange. David began to get used to the presence of the blue man. David even tried to get to know him better, even though there was no language that could understand the blue man. Could it be that the man came from space? Or an evolution of water creatures? Night had come. David again faced the siege of the blue man at the lighthouse. They came out of the water to attack David and Gruner. But David didn't seem to be able to. He didn't have the courage to fire a barrage of shots at the blue man. As a result, David fainted and was woken up by Gruner using water. Gruner scolded him, saying that to survive on this island requires great courage and abandon human nature. At that time, David was asked to get clean water from a small waterfall. But when he returned, David saw Gruner having sex with the blue woman. It made David a little awkward seeing them. Night came again. David and Gruner faced the gang of blue men again. But Gruner wanted to make David braver. So Gruner let David work, alone locking him from the inside. In the morning, David was seen covered in blood, but it made him stronger and braver. Day by day, month by month, they went through many obstacles and attacks. David became more formed and brave. But the more he killed the blue man, the more David felt something was wrong. David also began to get close to the blue woman until he gave him the name Anaris. Anaris seemed to feel something different from David. He was different from Gruner. One night, they were surrounded by an attack by the blue man. Gruner and David were forced to hide in the lighthouse until morning. The next day, David saw a large ship from a distance. He had to signal the ship about their presence. But Gruner stopped him. Gruner did not allow David to leave the island. But Anaris seemed to side with David. What really happened to Gruner? Why didn't he want to return to human civilization? Was he too afraid of facing the cruelty of the world compared to the attacks of the blue humans? Weeks had passed. David was getting closer to Anaris. David seemed unable to accept seeing Anaris being hurt by Gruner. Who was cruel here? Humans or Arenes? David gave Arenes a gift in the form of a po-bone carving in the shape of a boat. Then Anaris showed David a cracked boat that might still be repaired. Gruner apparently knew about the boat. There used to be Portuguese soldiers who came to the island. But they were attacked by the blue humans and could not survive. The Portuguese soldiers brought a lot of dynamite that sank with their ship not far from the island. David had an idea to take the dynamite. They repaired the boat and dived using the diving equipment left at the lighthouse. In between, Gruner saw David with Anaris. It seemed that Gruner didn't like it. The next day, Gruner and David tried to take dynamite belonging to the Portuguese army from the bottom of the sea. David would dive while Gruner was on the boat, helping David from above. They managed to get 2 boxes of dynamite, but one box didn't seem to be usable. David and Gruner began to plant the dynamite around the lighthouse to fortify it from the attacks of the blue humans. But strangely, the blue humans hadn't come to attack them for the past few days. What happened? Pecan food was running out, and the blue humans could be a source of food for them. Anaris returned from the sea, but only got a few starfish, which made Gruner upset. Gruner tried to hurt Anaris, but David stopped him. Gruner has a pretty crazy plan. It will risk his life. They will open the lighthouse door to lure the blue man, while Anaris is used to summon her people. Anaris continues to be forced until he looks like she is crying. The kerosene lamp placed in front of the door suddenly goes out. When David tries to relight the fire, a large number of blue men appear. This trick turns out to be successful. The dynamite is detonated to create chaos there. Even David, Anaris, and Gruner are also affected. Luckily, they are still safe, but Anaris has disappeared since the explosion. Gruner finishes off the blue man who is still breathing. David feels that it is an unnecessary action. That night, the blue man was not seen. Then Gruner tells the story of how he was able to get Anaris. Gruner found her when Anaris was still small, stranded on the shore and raised by Gruner. Unfortunately, Gruner is increasingly only using Anaris. Day by day, they almost never get attacked by the blue man again. But David sees some of them in the water. They didn't attack and just left. One day, David found Gruner's collection of cards. He also saw a photo of a couple who turned out to be Gruner. Was that his wife? One time, David walked along the beach and saw a small blue human figure. It turned out the blue human was not alone. There was Anaris behind him. Was the little blue human Anaris's child? Not long after many blue humans appeared behind Anaris, it seemed they were not dangerous. But Gruner ruined the atmosphere. He threatened and fired a gun to scare them. Gruner saw Anaris and ordered her to go home, but Anaris refused. She had the right to be free. Anaris and her friends didn't want any more war. They had been disturbed since long ago by the soldiers who came. But it seemed Gruner was stubborn. He fired a flare that hit Anaris's child. David tried to beat Gruner, but at that time, David made him realize Gruner is not a bad person, and also his real name is Aldo. He was a weather observer before David. Gruner seemed to feel guilty for his actions. He came out and surrendered himself to be killed by the blue man. It didn't feel like a year had passed since David was there. Some people asked where David was, but David said he was Gruner. The previous worker had died of typhus. David became like someone who had lost his mind. Would David be the same as Gruner? While Anaris lived freely in the sea, and would their lives be disturbed again by humans?